the issue of religion, which I remember, if I remember correctly, which is probably not the case, but what I remember around 2000, leading in 2001, there was a lot of discussion about a growing anti-Islam rhetoric. And this was interpreted by some very prestigious theoreticians, as well as ordinary folk, as the reconstitution of world power after the end of the Cold War. This kind of dichotomous view of the world, where you had the goodies and the baddies, had suddenly collapsed after 1989. And it was important because the whole structure of power globally was built on this sense of the dichotomies, Manichaean dichotomies, as I said, of evil and good. It was important to reconstitute them. And Islam, for perhaps a number of reasons, seemed to offer one axis along which this could be reconstituted. It was, in fact, related to the idea of a Christian modernity and a Christian civilization. And if you remember the famous clash of civilizations and the end of history, Huntington and Fukuyama and theoreticians like that. But it's not just about ideas, and I think that what I've concluded is that it's not, of course, to do with religion at all. Religion is used opportunistically, both by the powers that be. Unfortunately, it's also used, as we've seen in other places in Northern Ireland, to go no further, it's also used opportunistically by groups on the ground. In 5-6 days, we will come to another commemoration, Shatila, the massacre. This was a signal to progressive people in not only Latin America but all over the world that it was possible to carry out a revolution, if you like, maybe with not a capital R, through electoral politics. And this was very important, not just, as I said, in Latin America, but in Europe, where you had strong trade unions, you had strong communist and socialist parties, all participating in electoral politics. So this promised a future of engagement and transformation. Equally, of course, 1973 signaled the opposite, and it made it very clear that the boundaries of reform and change, and in particular confronting multinational capitalism, were very, very well guarded, and that therefore they had to adapt their policies and take on board a coup. I was in Italy at the time, and the fears amongst Italian people were very strong about a coup in their own country. After all, fascism was, within living memory of most Italians at the time, or of many of them. So the lessons have been harsh, and I think that it's also important to bear in mind that what happened after Pinochet was put to power from Allende was that Chile became the pioneer of the model which is now governing every aspect of our existence. The Chicago Boys, as they were called, used Chile as their experimenting ground to implement and test out their theories in practice. And that was before Margaret Thatcher in this country, Ronald Reagan in the US, took up these policies on board, and we're still living the consequences. And now it's become sort of commonplace. We take it for granted that the market is dominant, this is more your field than mine, but that the market knows what it's doing, that the market is best left alone, deregulation, and so on and so forth, and that individual interest, self-interest, is more important than collective interest. So now we do take these things for granted after 40 years, but it's important to remember that the gestation and birth of that model was a very bloody one. So I think from Chile, what we learn is the connections between violence, political power, and economic power. And we also learn that whatever narratives are put in place, in those days it was sedition and terrorism, just as much as it is now. Communism was replaced later on by Islam, but whatever narrative is put in place, the interests that are at play unfortunately, are the same. There's a continuity in terms of who gains, yes, in whose interest is this being carried out. What I call the coalition of the wicked also, I think, is important. It wasn't called the coalition of the wicked, it was called the Plan Condor. The condor is a large Andean bird, and this plan, which again was developed and promoted by the US, meant that all the countries, Chile, Argentina, Uruguay, and neighboring countries, had a mutual obligation to transfer people information and indeed persecute people across national borders and boundaries. So murder, sequestration, disappearances, national borders, national sovereignty was not the issue here. This was a global phenomenon.